I was sitting in a packed Starbucks in Shinjuku last week. You know, the kind of place where the noise level creates this constant chaotic hum. And right next to me, a guy in a shark suit stands up. He doesn't pack his bag. He doesn't ask me to watch his stuff. He just walks away toward the restroom, leaving a brand new MacBook Pro wide open, an iPhone, and a bulging leather wallet just sitting right there on the table. Coming from a city like New York or London, my internal alarm bells immediately started ringing. I mean, I found myself physically tensing up, unable to even drink my coffee, just staring at that table. In my head, I was already writing the police report for him. I watched a stream of strangers squeeze past his chair, backpacks brushing against his table. I was just waiting for that inevitable snatch and grab moment that a dozen times before, but then just nothing happened. 10 minutes passed. He strolled back, sat down, and took a sip of his latte as if he hadn't just risked his entire digital life. It was completely surreal. But the most jarring part wasn't the lack of theft. It was the lack of anxiety. Nobody else in the cafe even glanced at this unguarded pile of wealth. It felt less like a public space and more like, I don't know, a private living room shared by strangers. It made me realize that what was protecting that laptop wasn't the police or some security guard. It was an invisible psychological force field that is almost impossible for an outsider to fully comprehend.
That phenomena, which a lot of travelers call the cafe test, it really perfectly encapsulates a profound and challenging question about the fundamental architecture of modern civilization.
The architecture of civilization, that's a great way to put it.
Well, when you look at an urban center of this scale, a vast metropolitan area housing, 37 million people, and you see this level of order and trust, you realize the infrastructure of safety is completely different.
It's not built on things we can see.
Exactly. Order is maintained not by overt, expensive security systems or, intensive policing, but by an unseen internal psychological mechanism that citizens just carry with them.
It changes everything about how you navigate your day. And we've been gathering sources that drill really deeply into this unique cultural and sociological phenomenon. Our mission today is to take a complete deep dive into that invisible force field. We need to understand the sociocultural mechanisms that underpin such a high-trust society. How is it built, piece by piece?
And what are the benefits? What are the efficiencies?
Right. We will analyze the resulting economic efficiencies, the immense trust dividend that this system pays out daily. But critically, we also have to examine the significant psychological and social trade-offs, the hidden price, particularly the challenges that homogeneity and resistance to change introduce when global forces demand adaptation.
Precisely. We are moving past just the superficial admiration of the safety and digging into the cultural contract that actually purchases it. And what we find, really, is that the safety is built on a foundation of intense social pressure.
So let's start with the mechanism itself, because that invisible force field, it has a specific name and a definition. Sekhantai.
Yes, Sekhantai. It's a rich concept, directly translating to something like one's standing or appearance in the eyes of others. But it's far more than just simple reputation management.
It's deeper than that.
Oh, much deeper.
Oh.
In a practical sense, it acts as a pervasive, invisible, psychological panopticon. Everyone is, in effect, watching and being watched simultaneously, and that collective social gaze is the ultimate regulator of behavior.
So the power, then, lies in the deterrent. The primary fear isn't about getting a ticket or going to jail.
Correct. The primary deterrent for inappropriate behavior, whether it's something minor like littering or something major like theft, isn't the fear of some delayed legal punishment, a cop, a judge, a prison sentence. It's the terrifying, immediate fear of social death.
Social death. What does that actually mean in practice?
It means ostracization, losing face within your group, and a fundamental severing of your connection to the community. This is the absolute cornerstone of a shame culture, where your internal moral compass is almost secondary to how you are reflected in the eyes of others.
To make that concept tangible, we can look at how it plays out in a really anonymous, high-pressure urban situation. The sources shared a great story about a salaryman on the train.
Right, let's call him Kenji. He's riding the packed Yamono line during the evening rush hour. This is peak anonymity in a crowd of millions. The train is jammed, it jerks to a stop at Shibuya Station, and in the crush of people getting off, a thick leather wallet falls out of someone's coat pocket and lands right on the seat next to him.
And the owner is just gone, swallowed by the crowd.
Gone in the surge. Now, in most major low-trust cities, that wallet is also gone. It's a private moment of opportunity, right? A windfall.
Of course, no one saw, it's yours.
But for Kenji, even in that fleeting, private moment, Sekhantai kicks in. He feels the weight of the collective. Although the other passengers are just staring at their phones or actively avoiding eye contact, he internalizes the judgment of the group. He feels those eyes, even if they're not literally on him.
So taking the wallet wouldn't just be an illegal act. The police might never even know.
Exactly. The legality is secondary. Crucially, it would be an act that, if discovered or even just known by him, would sever his connection to the group. It would brand him as someone who violates the essential harmony of society, making him an outsider in the one place he needs to belong.
So he picks it up and takes it to the station master. The reward isn't some feeling of individual altruism or a moral high five. It is simply the overwhelming relief of avoiding a social catastrophe. He avoided the terrifying fear of disrupting the harmony.
That single action illustrates the foundation of the entire high-trust contract. It's enforced by mutual constant surveillance and a collective internalized fear of shame.
And this mechanism is rooted really deeply in the ethical and philosophical tradition, isn't it? It's not a modern invention.
No, not at all. Scholars describe Japanese morals as a very pragmatic and realistic ethical foundation. It doesn't rely on universal values derived from a metaphysical or absolute being, like a Western concept of God or abstract natural rights, to define good and evil.
So it's not about a transcendent good or bad.
Precisely. Morality is defined by the consensus of the particular community, and its absolute top priority is maintaining harmony among human relationships here and now.
That distinction, pragmatic harmony versus transcendental values, that seems crucial for understanding the difference in societal operating systems. So if morality is purely focused on the social context, what are the essential rules, the sort of cultural grammar of Sekhan, this collective social consciousness that actually regulate day-to-day behavior?
The researchers really distill this into three key elements that define how people must act within this system. The first one is the non-existence of individuals.
The non-existence of individuals, that sounds intense.
It is. It's the idea that collectivism is paramount. Yeah. And the self must not be conspicuous. Personal desires, unique traits, or even your own reasonable individual judgment must sometimes be subjugated to the dictates of Sekhan.
In other words, you are highly integrated into the community, sometimes to the point of completely merging your identity with the group.
Exactly. This leads to the powerful, unspoken dictum: anyone who stands out will be forced to conform. The pressure to blend in is intense, and it's pervasive. This is why you see such order maintained even during immense social stress, like after a natural disaster. People fear being conspicuous, disruptive, or appearing selfish more than they fear many physical dangers.
That sounds incredibly draining on a personal level, but I can see how structurally it's highly efficient for maintaining social control and predictability. What's the second element of Sekhan?
The second is the priority of emotion over reason. Conduct that stems from a pure heart or sincere emotional alignment, kyo-kyo-kaki-kokoro, purity of heart, is prioritized over a rational, logical explanation.
What does that mean in practice? Emotional sincerity takes precedence over logical debate.
Yes. So, if I understand you correctly, if a proposal is logically sound, but it's emotionally disruptive to the group harmony, the pure heart rule suggests that the proposal is actually wrong.
Precisely. This system facilitates what scholars call high-text communication. You don't need to explicitly state every policy or rule. Emotional alignment and consensus are far more important than reasoned debate.
This underpins concepts like santaku, which is the ability to conjecture or read the room. You are expected to know the desired outcome or the social truth without needing a rational explanation, just by reading the collective emotional state.
Wow. You must know the right answer, even if it's never spoken aloud. That requires an incredible amount of psychological calibration constantly.
It does. And the third element is present centralism. This describes a consciousness that focuses intensely, almost exclusively, on the immediate issue at hand. There's a weaker sense of historical consciousness, which allows them to compartmentalize past actions and future consequences. The motto is basically, past is past, present is present.
How does that actually manifest in society? What does that look like?
It often manifests as improvisation and temporary measures for problem solving. The goal is to restore harmony now, and while this sounds adaptable, it can contribute to a lack of long-term strategic perspective or a failure to learn fully from past evidence. Why? Because the immediate social pressure, the present, overwhelms the need for structural, time-consuming reflection on the past. You solve the problem to maintain harmony today, perhaps at the expense of a durable long-term solution.
That paints a really clear picture of the deep cultural foundation. The high-trust society is built on collectivism, emotional alignment, and immediate harmony. Now let's connect this cultural rulebook to some empirical data. How does this demand for conformity and reputation management play out in a controlled setting? We saw a fascinating study analyzing social conformity in a hierarchical setting.
Yes, this study provided the empirical proof that Sekhantai is truly operational. Researchers designed an experiment where participants were assigned an intermediate rank between a superior and an inferior partner, supposedly based on their performance in perceptual tasks. They were then asked to rate fractal images and then given a chance to adjust their ratings after seeing their partner's rating.
So they were essentially testing whether people changed their mind based on the rank of the person giving the alternative opinion, a simple test for conformity.
Exactly. But the key manipulation, the really clever part, was visibility. They tested two conditions. Were the participants' choices public and visible to their partners, or were they anonymous and private? This tested the difference between internalized belief and external reputation management.
And what did the data reveal about why people conform?
Well, the results strongly supported what is known as the impression hypothesis, and they rejected the accuracy hypothesis.
Okay, break those down. Accuracy hypothesis would mean?
The accuracy hypothesis suggests you conform because you genuinely believe the superior person, your boss, is more likely to be correct. You're seeking the right answer. The impression hypothesis, on the other hand, states that the motivation to conform is rooted in seeking social approval and, crucially, avoiding the disapproval of those with higher status.
So how did they prove it was about impression and not accuracy?
It was in the data. Participants modified their preferences significantly more to match a superior partner when their choice was in the public condition, when it was visible, compared to the anonymous private condition. When they were anonymous, when Sekhantai was temporarily disabled, the motivation to conform just dropped dramatically.
So the power of the superior's opinion only truly kicked in when the subordinate felt they were under the public eye.
Exactly. It's not about finding the truth. It's about managing your reputation.
That is a phenomenal confirmation of this psychological panopticon. It demonstrates that the whole system leverages the fear of being seen as an outlier or as disrespectful to the hierarchy.
And the study went even further, looking at individual psychological profiles. They measured individual differences in traits that might make people more susceptible to this pressure. And they found that conformity to superiors in public situations was significantly higher among those with greater social dominance orientation, SDO, and a stronger fear of negative evaluation, FNE.
Okay, we definitely need to unpack those terms for clarity. SDO is?
Social dominance orientation, or SDO, reflects a strong individual drive to seek higher social status and maintain the legitimacy of social hierarchy. These are people who inherently believe in social stratification and really want to climb the ladder. If you have high SDO, you're highly tuned to the rules of the hierarchy.
And fear of negative evaluation, FNE.
FNE is exactly what it sounds like. It's an intense sensitivity and chronic anxiety about how other people perceive you. These individuals are extremely motivated to avoid appearing incompetent or foolish or non-conforming.
So the people who are most intensely focused on status, the SDO people, and most anxious about being judged negatively, the FNE people, are the ones who conform the most when their actions are public.
The mechanism is crystal clear. The system rewards and optimizes for individuals who are intensely sensitive to social hierarchy and who are highly anxious about how others perceive them. Sekhantai leverages anxiety to enforce absolute order, making conformity the path of least psychological resistance.
Okay, we've established the cultural contract. Safety and order are purchased by maximizing conformity and internalizing social anxiety. This leads us directly to the benefit side of the ledger. What does this high-trust environment buy you? We mentioned the trust dividend earlier.
It buys immense economic and cognitive efficiency. I mean, think back to your story in this Shinjuku cafe. The high-trust environment drastically reduces the costs associated with vigilance, security systems, and loss prevention. You don't need the elaborate security architecture of a low-trust society. Fewer CCTVs, less need for elaborate locks, less insurance fraud.
That sounds abstract, but the real-world impact must be huge.
Absolutely. The collective cognitive load of urban life is dramatically lightened. In a high-trust system, you are not constantly performing risk assessment against every stranger you encounter. You can focus your mental energy on productive tasks rather than personal security. This is a massive structural advantage, facilitating swift, efficient transactions and interactions.
But the price of admission to this system, as we've discussed, is the reliance on profound homogeneity. The mechanism of Sekhantai only works because there is a near-universal internalization of the same implicit social rules. Everyone is operating on the same social operating system.
And this reliance on sameness leads directly to a major systemic vulnerability when interacting with the global market, a phenomenon known as the Galapagos Syndrome, or Galapagos.
I find this analogy brilliant. It's drawn directly from Darwin's Islands, right? Where isolated flora and fauna evolve independently, becoming perfectly specialized for their unique environment.
It's a perfect metaphor. If you try to take a species perfectly adapted to one island and move it to the mainland, it often fails instantly because it hasn't evolved to deal with the broader competition or conditions. In economic terms, this refers to products or systems specialized for the highly unique local market that are then unsuccessful abroad because they fail to meet global standards or contexts.
The classic illustration being the origin of the term itself, Japanese 3G mobile phones.
Yes, the Garakai, or advanced feature phones. They were technically highly advanced, developing features that were really innovative like mobile wallets, GPS functionality, and advanced cameras, years before they appeared globally. But because they were designed purely around the closed, specific needs of the local carriers and the Japanese consumer market, they were built on proprietary technology and were totally incompatible with worldwide GSM CDMA networks.
So they were evolutionary dead ends outside of Japan. They were perfectly optimized for the local island, but they just couldn't survive on the global mainland.
And this isolation is visible across numerous sectors, not just mobile tech. Take key cars, the light cars.
Right. These are those small, boxy vehicles, engines restricted to under 660 cc.
Exactly. The Japanese government designed a specific regulatory framework just for them. They get huge preferential treatment, lower purchase tax, significantly lower insurance costs, and they only need a small parking space registration certificate. This drives immense domestic production by all the major manufacturers. It's basically an internal stimulus plan for the auto industry.
Which creates a huge domestic market, but no export market.
Zero profitable export markets. They are designed so strictly around domestic regulations that making them compliant with global safety or emission standards is prohibitively expensive. It completely wipes out their low-cost advantage. They're a perfectly adapted local species that simply cannot compete globally.
You see this isolation even in fundamental infrastructure designed for basic interaction with foreigners, like banking.
It's a profound contradiction, isn't it? Japan was a pioneer in innovative mobile payment methods. The wallet phone was introduced way back in 2004, a decade ahead of Western adoption. Yet they struggled with basic global compatibility in physical banking.
Yeah, the sources point out that historically, the vast majority of Japanese ATMs, something like 190,000 of them, did not accept foreign bank or credit cards.
That's just staggering for a major G7 economy. Only a tiny fraction, primarily those run by post offices and certain convenience stores, were internationally compatible. This highlights how internal, isolated systems, the cash-based, Sekhantai-enforced, high-trust domestic market, created zero pressure to adapt for international visitors. The high domestic efficiency was purchased at the expense of global integration. The government itself had to express official concern over this isolation, forcing a slow, painful process of increased acceptance.
So the system is so locally optimized that it actively creates barriers for international interaction. It's easy to look at this and say, that's a uniquely Japanese problem, but the Galapagos Syndrome actually shows up in other places. Let's look at South Korea, for example.
South Korea offers a really compelling geopolitically driven example. Because of the military demarcation line separating it from North Korea, the country functions as an effective island nation. Access to bordering countries like China and Russia is impossible except by air or sea. This isolation naturally impacts trade standards and flow.
And their unique standards create these specific, often invisible, trade barriers.
Take the seemingly minor issue of the vehicle width limit. Globally, in Europe, Russia, and China, the vehicle width limit is 2.55 meters. South Korea sets it at 2.5 meters. Now, this 5-centimeter difference seems negligible, but European commercial vehicle manufacturers complain this technically obstructs the export of their large buses and trucks to South Korea. And conversely, trucks made in South Korea are often 2.5 meters wide domestically, but require modification to 2.55 meters for export. They've evolved a specific local form.
And they also have incredibly restrictive road laws that deviate from global norms.
Oh, absolutely. The ban on motorcycles on expressways and motorways is a highly specific, localized law that creates a huge barrier for the two-wheel transportation industry that you just don't see in most developed countries. And on the tech side, they face similar issues. Restrictions on geographic data limit the utility of global platforms like Google Maps, forcing complex workarounds. And just like Japan's internal focus, they mandate mobile phone number verification for signing up for many online services, which makes access extremely difficult for overseas residents or those just visiting.
It's all about prioritizing national control and internal standards over global compatibility. The US, though, even as a massive global player, is not immune to this kind of isolated evolution, driven more by institutional inertia than culture or geopolitics.
The classic example there is the US's painfully slow adoption of the EMV chip card standard. While Europe and most of Asia adopted chip and PIN systems years ago, moving away from the old swiped magnetic stripe cards, US merchants and banks were really hesitant to upgrade their hardware. They cited high costs and low immediate return on investment.
This meant that for years, the US was operating on an outdated, much less secure payment system.
The transition only began in earnest around 2015 after a series of high-profile retail data breaches forced the issue, and travelers found their U.S.-issued magnetic stripe cards were becoming useless abroad. The delay meant the U.S. payment system evolved separately, creating inconveniences and requiring major payment providers to impose strict deadlines where liability for fraud would shift to the party that had not upgraded its technology. And even after the rollout, issues persisted, including chip-based transactions taking frustratingly longer to process than swipe cards. A perfect example of a system that adapted slowly and poorly because it was optimized for its own isolation.
So whether it's driven by deep cultural homogeneity, geopolitical isolation, or just cost-based institutional inertia, the Galapagos Syndrome shows that local optimization often creates global incompatibility. It's the unavoidable cost of isolation in business and technology.
Which brings us to the core issue of trade-offs. The high-trust society buys that incredible dividend of safety and efficiency, but what is the hidden cost on the individual?
Right. We shift now from the economic cost of isolation to the psychological price of constant self-monitoring. The safety provided by Sekhantai enforces what the sources describe as a stifling conformity, where citizens feel this perpetual pressure to be considerate and to make themselves small. They are always managing their own visibility.
This trade-off is often best illustrated by contrasting the physical safety of urban life with the psychological strain of constant self-policing. Let's look at the individual experience.
Consider Emmy the designer. She enjoys the incredible efficiency of leaving her belongings unguarded at work. That's the efficiency dividend in action. She doesn't need to waste time or mental energy on security.
But when she walks home late at night, she is physically safe from theft. Yet she is not free. She worries her heels are clicking too loudly on the pavement, disturbing her neighbors. She worries about being perceived as conspicuous. She might wear a mask not for health reasons, but to hide her lack of makeup, to prevent appearing unprofessional or drawing attention to herself.
So she is safe from external threat, but she is never free from the internal pressure to blend in, to be quiet, to be identical to everyone else. The psychological enforcement of the high-trust contract is constant, demanding this continuous sacrifice of the individual self for the collective harmony.
And this psychological pressure leads to some truly fascinating and counterintuitive health implications when you compare East and West. In established Western psychological views, higher subjective social status, your perceived ranking on the community ladder, is generally protective of your health. Higher status means more resources, more control over your life, and typically lower stress, which leads to better health outcomes.
But the research comparing U.S. and Japanese adults found that this subjective social status, or SSS, acts like a double-edged sword, completely reversing the expected benefits.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Researchers conducted a sophisticated cross-cultural study, and they measured biological health risk, BHR, which is far more precise than just asking people how stressed they feel. BHR is a composite index using 4 specific biomarkers related to chronic systemic inflammation and cardiovascular malfunction.
Let's define those biomarkers, because this is where the science gets really interesting and concrete.
Sure. BHR includes interleukin-6, IL-6, and C-reactive protein, CRP, which are key markers for chronic systemic inflammation, and systolic blood pressure, SEP, and the total to HDL cholesterol ratio, which indicate cardiovascular risk. Elevated levels of these 4 markers are strongly linked to chronic diseases and premature mortality.
Okay, so what did they find when they compared high-status Americans to high-status Japanese men using this measurable biological index?
Well, first, they noted that the adverse health effect of SSS was limited predominantly to males in both cultures. But the comparison between the cultures was stark. For American males, higher SSS predicted lower biological health risk, which concerns the standard Western view. Status functions as a psychological resource. It affirms personal achievement and mastery. which downregulates biological responses to adversity.
But the result was dramatically reversed for the East Asian sample, specifically for Japanese males.
For Japanese males, higher SSS predicted significantly higher BHR, meaning compromised biological health. And this reversal occurred even when controlling for objective status markers like occupation or education. The psychological benefit of achieving status was completely overwhelmed by the social burden it imposed.
This is the core price of peace we've been talking about. Why does being a high-status man in Japan statistically increase your measurable biological health risk? What is the mechanism?
The researchers found the answer in how these men cope with stress, or rather, how they are prevented from coping. The elevated health risk for high-status Japanese men was statistically mediated by their reduced use of goal disengagement.
Okay, explain goal disengagement in simple terms.
Goal disengagement is a critical psychological coping strategy. It is the ability to recognize that a goal is unattainable, stop striving for it, lower your aspirations, and adjust to constraints. It's the ability to say, I quit, or I failed, or I need to shift my priorities for my own sanity.
So in the Western individualistic model, if your high-status professional goal is stressing you out, you have the psychological flexibility to step back, reevaluate, or even change careers.
Precisely. But in the interdependent, collectivistic culture built on Sekhantai, high status carries a massive burden of non-negotiable social responsibility and expectation that must be met to maintain social harmony. High status is not a personal reward, it is a social obligation. These men are perpetually expected to embody the group's success, prioritize the company or the community, and sacrifice their personal well-being without complaint.
So they are trapped. They are caught in a conflict. The professional demand to perform perfectly, combined with the social obligation to harmonize all the relations around them. And they can't employ goal disengagement. They can't quit or lower the bar without massive social shame and backlash, potentially disrupting the very harmony they are meant to uphold.
And this persistence, this inability to disengage, driven entirely by social expectation and the dictates of the group, is what translates directly into those impaired biological health markers. The peace of mind and efficiency gained by the collective are being paid for by the chronic stress and reduced goal flexibility of its highest-ranking male members. It demonstrates that the expectation that power entails constant, exhausting responsibility rather than opportunity becomes a measurable health burden.
This inherent cultural and psychological trade-off safety and efficiency in exchange for homogeneity and conformity brings us to the critical challenge. What happens when homogeneity is no longer an option?
That is the ultimate test for this high-trust system. Its remarkable cohesion relies on the near-universal internalization of implicit social rules. When diversity is introduced, be it cultural, demographic, or familial, that implicit social contract proves to be very brittle. The visible force field starts to flicker.
This is perfectly illustrated by the trash bag incident from the sources. This story, set in a traditional suburb, shows how a single variable of difference can expose the system's fragility at the ground level.
Right. Imagine a traditional Osaka neighborhood where the implicit rules for garbage sorting are rigid, complex, and unwritten, but have worked flawlessly for generations because everyone follows them. The neighborhood head, let's call him Mr. Tanaka, relies entirely on the homogeneity of his neighbors for compliance. Then, a polite, hardworking Brazilian resident moves in, a perfect, contributing member of society who simply doesn't know the local unwritten rules.
And he makes a simple, innocent mistake, putting out burnable trash on a plastics day.
For Mr. Tanaka, this is not just a mistake, it's catastrophic. It's a systemic shock. The system, which was optimized through this Galapagosization, has no social protocol for accommodation or education or conflict resolution with an outsider who simply doesn't know the unwritten code. The neighborhood's cohesion was built on exclusion, the assumption that everyone was the same, not on a framework of accommodation. Introducing that single variable of difference caused the local social infrastructure to buckle.
This tells us that while the efficiency generated by the system is incredible, its reliance on homogeneity makes it fundamentally brittle. When that homogeneity fades, the very mechanisms that create high trust become serious obstacles to social innovation and adaptation.
And this fragility is reflected in the larger institutional context. Despite being the world's fourth largest economy, Japan consistently ranks poorly, 23rd out of 30 surveyed high-income countries in the social sustainability category of global policy rankings. The country struggles significantly with UN Sustainable Development Goal 10, reducing inequality and inclusion.
And the cultural narrative actively resists this necessary shift.
It absolutely does. The Nihonjin discourse is central here. This is a pervasive ideology, a body of literature and media discussion that posits Japan as a unique, fundamentally homogeneous, and culturally distinct society. It reinforces monoculturalism and Japanese exceptionalism.
And how does Nihon Jinran impact policy?
This worldview permeates education, media, and policymaking, actively minimizing or rejecting diversity and making Japanese identity highly exclusive. It provides the intellectual justification for the institutional inertia. While the Japanese Constitution guarantees equality under Article 14, enforcement is often weak because the dominant Nihon Jinran narrative fosters deep institutional resistance to any policy changes, like those related to diversity or family structure, that might challenge the perceived cultural core.
Let's look at how this systemic marginalization plays out for diverse households, because the system clearly favors one highly specific model, the heterosexual nuclear family supported by the male breadwinner.
The sources reveal a clear matrix of domination, impacting various marginalized groups through 4 distinct forms of oppression: structural, disciplinary, hegemonic, and interpersonal.
Take single-parent households first. These households, particularly those led by women, face both profound economic and social disadvantage.
You see clear structural oppression. Their poverty rate is just staggering. 48.3% for single-parent households in 2022, placing Japan among the highest in the OECD. This stems from insufficient welfare support and legal difficulty in enforcing child support from absent partners. But they also face crushing hegemonic oppression. The media and cultural narrative, supported by Sekhan's ideals, reinforce the idealization of the 2-parent nuclear family. This leads to intense social stigma where single parents are often judged as irresponsible or incomplete and seen as violating the fundamental social contract.
And that stigma translates into tangible exclusion.
Yes, through interpersonal exclusion. Single mothers often report being excluded from community decision-making, like local neighborhood meetings or parent-teacher associations, which assume the traditional model of a stay-at-home mother who has the time and social standing to participate. The system, built for a specific kind of family, pushes them out.
Now, what about migrant families and ethnic minorities?
They primarily face disciplinary oppression through bureaucratic barriers. This is the structural rigidity of the system designed for homogeneity. Application processes for housing, education, and welfare are often only available in Japanese. The bureaucratic red tape creates rigid procedures that limit their engagement with essential services and create endless administrative friction.
And this is layered with the cultural pressure to assimilate.
That's the hegemonic oppression. The dominant discourse of homogeneity pressures them to assimilate entirely and downplay their cultural heritage. The rhetoric centers on cultural harmony and the preservation of Japanese core values, resulting in migrant families being viewed as perpetual foreigners, regardless of how fluent or integrated they are. Even terms commonly used, like gaijin, foreigner, often carry exclusionary connotations, maintaining a clear in-group, out-group divide.
It's clear the legal structure itself is the final bulwark of resistance, prioritizing the traditional model.
The legal framework overwhelmingly privileges the heterosexual nuclear family model, ignoring other forms of cohabitation, which constitutes further structural oppression. For example, despite some municipal governments introducing same-sex partnership certificates, which is a step toward integration, these certificates do not carry legal weight equivalent to marriage certificates at the national level. They are symbolic, but they don't grant rights to inheritance, hospital visitation, or joint custody.
And while some district court rulings have argued that this exclusion is unconstitutional, those rulings have not yet translated into comprehensive national legislative change. The institutional inertia remains powerfully strong.
The structure of Sekhan is fighting back, preferring stability and exclusion over the unpredictable nature of inclusion.
So how does a system built on exclusion and homogeneity adapt to inevitable diversity and demographic pressure? What are the strategic pathways forward to ensure its survival?
Well, change requires a dual approach, addressing both legal frameworks and cultural norms simultaneously. The proposed solutions can be categorized into short-term integration steps and long-term inclusion strategies.
Let's focus on short-term integration. These sound like practical steps to incorporate marginalized groups without some immediate, massive legal upheaval.
Exactly. This includes implementing simple but vital measures like multilingual and multicultural service counters in ward offices to immediately break down bureaucratic barriers for migrant families. It means enforcing inclusive hiring and management strategies in businesses to combat employment discrimination. It also means promoting and expanding those local same-sex partnership certificates to provide concrete, recognized benefits at the municipal level, even if full marriage equality is delayed. These steps aim to incorporate diverse individuals into the functional and daily dimensions of the social fabric.
And for long-term inclusion, we're talking about fundamental structural transformation, changing the code of the operating system itself.
Yes, addressing the root causes. That involves comprehensive structural change, most critically, constitutional reform, to explicitly recognize family diversity and ensure equality and inclusion at the highest normative level. It requires reforming the welfare model with an intersectional approach that moves past the outdated assumption that all households conform to the salary male with wife model.
A shift towards a proportional universalism that acknowledges the diverse economic and social realities of modern households.
Exactly. This is the structural change needed to move past the idea that social cohesion must be built on exclusion and instead accommodate the diverse reality of Japanese households.
Yeah.
Change demands both top-down legal reform and bottom-up cultural engagement to ensure the system's longevity in the face of inevitable demographic shifts. We have taken a deep dive today into the intricate architecture of one of the world's most successful forms of order. The legendary safety of Tokyo, symbolized by that unattended laptop, is an ultimate luxury, but it is purchased through a specific demanding cultural contract. Sekhantai, this deep-seated commitment to maintaining harmony and appearance, built on a foundation of profound homogeneity, generates immense economic efficiency, the trust dividend.
But that same invisible mechanism exacts a heavy and measurable price. We've seen the systemic brittleness it creates manifest in the Galapagos Syndrome, where hyperspecialization for the local context leads to global isolation. And we've seen the direct psychological cost, most dramatically revealed in the health data, showing that for high-status men, the burden of social responsibility undermines the health benefits of status, mediated by a crippling inability to disengage from overwhelming social goals.
The system works with incredible efficiency, but its successful functioning relies entirely on conformity, constant social pressure, and a powerful resistance to accommodating difference. This resistance is codified in cultural narratives like Nihonjineron and structural barriers that marginalize diverse households, protecting the homogeneity that makes the high-trust contract viable.
As global forces inevitably push for greater diversity and inclusion, the ultimate question is not whether the laptop will be stolen tomorrow, but whether this unique piece can be maintained and shared without requiring the complete homogeneity and isolation that first enabled it. The future of this high-trust society depends on whether it can successfully edit its internal operating system, or if its perfect local adaptation ultimately proves terminal in a world that requires global interoperability.